So welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Sound Bites. I can't even say sound bites anymore. With RokoM Michele. And this week is going to be on the power of moments. And you'll probably recognize it. And it came about because I've read the book, and so has Roko, The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. And there are so many things, and I wanted to do this topic for a while, that stood out to me in that it's like for me to go to action. It's like, I can do this. Let's do this stuff now. Let's talk to people. Let's coach leaders. And so I want to unpack some of that stuff. And I encourage you that if you haven't read the book, read the book because it's a good one. So here is, where's my quote? I'm gonna read my quote because I didn't write my quote down. So it's defining moments can be consciously created. You can be the architect of moments that matter. So that's a lot of words, but basically what it is there's things that moments that stick with us to where decades later we can recall that moment to where we stepped in and a decision was made, or we changed our own behavior. Those moments, we don't have to wait for them to happen, like serendipitous kind of thing. We can create that stuff. And one of the examples that was in the book that Roko and I were talking about that was powerful in a really fun way was where the Ritz-Carlton had, the stuffed animal was left behind. The poor little kid was crying because he wanted a stuffed animal. And the father lied to the child and said, basically Jimmy, I'm going to use that name, is on vacation. He'd stayed a little bit longer. He's vacationing. So he gets a call from the Ritz the next day and they found Jimmy, the stuffed animal, and they were going to send it back. And he said, oh my God, thank goodness, because I basically lied to my child and told him he was on vacation. So what arrived in the mail was this box with Jimmy, several pictures and Jimmy, where Jimmy was on vacation. He was on the golf cart. He was out by the pool. He was enjoying drinks. That moment, even though, and this is how it's so powerful, is that I didn't live that moment, but it shifted instantly my opinion of the Ritz-Carlton, which at that time I had never been to the Ritz-Carlton, but it put them elevated so high because of this moment that they had created. And so I think about that stuff and I'm like, we can do this. Mere mortals that we are, we can start creating these moments for ourselves and for other people. So I'll stop talking. What are your thoughts?
No, I totally agree with everything you said. And, when you first read the quote, the image that always comes to my mind, it takes me back to when I was a kid, going to Walt Disneyland in California, right? They are the masters at creating moments and memories. And there's such an impact in that single moment when you walk through the gates and you hear the music, or you see one of the characters, or just walking down Main Street. You just never forget the feeling. And I think that's part of it, is when you're starting to define the moment that you want to create, it's really taking a look at how you want that other person to feel as they experience whatever it is that you're providing. Communication, a service, whatever, a coaching moment, whatever it may be, but it's thinking about how's that person going to feel when I say or do this thing, and what's that memorable moment that they'll recall time and time again. It just creates such a strong image in their brain. They'll always recall it.
Yeah, what you took me to too, I remembered in the book, they were talking about how we are as humans and how our brains respond to stuff, that you can have this experience. The Disney thing is what triggered me. You can have this experience over this long period of time, and throughout let's say the Disney visit, right? You didn't have a really amazing time as you're waiting in line at the Matterhorn with 50 zillion other people, right? But I think they call them peak moments. But what happened is, if you end in this peak moment on the Disney visit, maybe it's the character visit with Mickey and Snow White and everybody else, that defines how you remember the entire experience. And so that's where it's like, I think about us as leadership or healthcare leaders, right? Patients. We have people that are, if they come into the hospital, they're at a really vulnerable, scary time in their lives. They're not having their best experience.
Right.
But I think how can we, you know, if you're talking about patient experience, how can we create moments for them that it doesn't have to be this is what we have to go through. And I don't have the answer to that.
Right.
But for me, the exciting part was, how do we start thinking about that?
Right.
In terms of moments.
Right. Right. And that, you know, again, part of that quote talked about being the architect. You can be the architect of those moments. And I think it is that intentionality around what is that experience that you want to provide. I mean, I'll speak from my personal experience when my dad was towards the end of his life and he was going to the hospital a lot. And this one time he was in the ICU, he had to be intubated and he was asleep when he was out when they intubated him. And my family knew that he is extremely claustrophobic and that I asked the nurse, you know, did they say before they put him under that they were going to intubate him so that when he wakes up, he knew that he was going to have this thing down? And they said, no. And I said, so he's extremely claustrophobic. So when he wakes up, we need to be prepared. He's going to struggle because he's not going to realize that he needs, you know, that this thing was put in his throat. And so when he did wake up, the nurse had shared with me enough about why it was there, what he needed to do to relax. And I had gotten a pen and a paper for him so that he communicate with me when he woke up. And I immediately shared with him, hey, you have this thing down your throat. Don't worry. It'll be fine. Just relax. And if you need to say something, just write it on the pen and paper. Creating that consciousness of, you know, hey, you're going to panic at first, but you know, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, it's, to your point, is preparing that moment, right? Knowing that this is going to happen, and it's the anticipation of it. I think the other part that came to me too, that I was thinking about, and you were talking, is, the awareness for me in how I've used it with coaching and other leaders since I read it in the book, was understanding what matters to other people, what matters to you. And the story in the book that they were talking about was another healthcare example. And this guy had been diagnosed in terminal cancer, young guy in his 20s. This was at a time when there wasn't palliative care. There wasn't, so it was until the very end, you're aggressively treating this thing. And so he's in the hospital and he maybe a week, 2 weeks left to live. And the doctor walked in, his sister was sitting there with him, and asked him, for the first time, no one had asked him, what matters to you? And he said, I want to go home. And doggone it. And the doctor walked over and he picked up the sister's jacket, wrapped this guy up in the coat, picked him up, carried him outside and put him in his sister's car so he could go home. Those moments, we don't have to have a dying person in front of us.
No.
To, as a leader, ask what matters to you. Because we could be well-intentioned and unintentionally have what unintended consequences, because we're not checking as we're creating moments, what matters to you. And it was the same thing, you thinking about your dad, what matters to him. Well, it matters that he understands, has orientation of what's going on. He's claustrophobic because he's going to feel constrained and tied in. And that stuff's powerful.
Yeah. The other, and, just building on that again, you said, it doesn't have to be these big moments. And that's exactly what they said in the book too. It's these small, meaningful acts of kindness, of intention, of thinking about the other person, but it's just these small moments, these small things that you can do that will immediately shift someone's experience of that time.
Yeah. So I think about that. And I think the thing for me to bring this topic to us and people that listen and watch is you don't have to be Ritz-Carlton. You don't have to be the doctor in the hospital. But it could be a leader with your team. It could be a parent with their kids. It could be you on your own. You know, tomorrow's not guaranteed. And so how do you think differently and be open to the possibilities of creating those moments?
Yeah. Look for them, find them, think of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's what stands out for me as we look, and because I think of us as connectors to information, stuff's going on, thoughts. And so that's one of those things that I'm like, there's more we can do with this. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat about this. And for anyone out there, read the book. It's
Yes,
worth it. And it's on Audible too, which if you're like me and do not want to sit down with a hard book, I have the book, but the Audible's real handy because I can just listen to it over and over again on the drive, but it's worth it. So Roko, what's one thing that you want people to walk away with on this topic of the power of moments?
You know, I think it really is about being intentional and thinking about how the other person will feel, or to your point, what matters to them. And just those small things that you can do will make a huge impact in the moment, but also going forward, because they're gonna create memories, positive memories that they'll forever remember.
Yeah. For me, I think this stands out is the story that I told with the doctor and stuff. Ask people what matters to them. I think that's the thing that I would encourage people to do, is what matters to you. And it's powerful in the chaos, the work, the craziness that happens, that you can literally stop people in the tracks, because a lot of times they're not asked. They're just not asked.
Yeah.
So I thank you for that. This is Leadership Soundbites with RokoM Michele. If you have more topics to share, please let us know. Like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, have a great day.
Okay.